Welcome back to Mages and Sages interview with the Old Mage. We are continuing our interview with Matt Forbeck. It was a little bit shorter session. I hope everybody enjoys it. And without any further ado, Matt Forbeck.
God, we screwed up, like what happened with Owen's wife, right? Which I was just horrifying, right? So you just don't know what's going to happen. That's one of the reasons, again, I'd rather work for myself than anybody else. And with the exception of the 6 months I spent as a student work visa workshop, and I spent a year and a half working for a company called Human Head Studios after the quadruplets were born, solely for the health insurance. As soon as my wife said, "Oh, I'm thinking about going back to work," I'm just getting antsy. I'm like, well, we could Cobra for 18 months. Fuck it, I'm quitting this week. You know? With the exception of those 2 times, I've worked for myself my entire life, and I don't see myself going any differently than that. And part of the problem, too, is you start pricing. Yeah, I live in a very cheap part of the world, which I grew up really easy. But I was offered a job at one point as being a head of a collectibles games division for Mattel. And they're like, okay, let's see what would cost, what you're making in Wisconsin right now, and what would it cost to pay you an equivalent amount of money given the cost of living increase to go move to El Segundo, California, which is where Mattel works, right? And they're like, wow, this would be more than your boss's boss is making. So, no, we can't hire you for that. Right? Seeing yourself out of things because of that, which is it's a good problem to have. I'm doing decently where I am, but, I have fairly unique circumstances, right? I'm not trying to brag. It's just I've steered my life in that direction. I'm fortunate enough that it worked out well for me because of where I grew up and the people I knew. And I often will tell people, if I had grown up in LA, I'd have gone into movies. If I'd grown up in New York, I'd have gone into traditional publishing. I grew up in southern Wisconsin, so I got into tabletop games.
Right.
It was what was there for a creative person.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. Yep. Well, and it's interesting because these days, now especially with the internet, there's such a pressure to turn whatever your hobby is into a side hustle.
Right.
You know, it's not just everyone is trying to and I streamed a D&D game for the first time last weekend, and it was a lot of fun, and I did it through a local stream that's already been established for a while, but there is this huge pressure, like, well, if you do all this work and you're doing all this stuff for it, how are you trying to turn that into money? And on the one hand, that's how guys like you and Ed and like so many, and Eric and so many others have been able to get a space in the RPG world. But on the other hand, I feel like that kind of forced pressure on creativity can, it can be a double-edged sword. Like, so you need that accountability, you need that structure at times, but there's also that constant pressure, like, well, how are you going to turn this into something that's monetized? It's like, well, I just like gaming, or I just want to do a really good job.
It doesn't have to be monetized either. I mean, you look, it's like any other creative industry. I think people tend to forget that. They go, geez, we need to pay game designers more. Yeah, we'd all like to be paid more. We need to pay writers more. We need to pay whatever. But, think about somebody who wants to be a rock star, right, or a pop star or whatever, right, in music. Mm-hmm. And how many people, pick up a guitar? How many people actually learn how to play it? You start with this massive number of people, and it gets smaller and smaller, like you're going to the tip of the pyramid as you go. And it's how many people play it, how many people actually get a band together, how many people actually practice that band, how many people get their first gig, how many people get their second gig, how many people actually get a recording contract, how many people actually get the record produced and make money. That can, it gets tinier and tinier as you go. And it's like that with every creative industry because, it's not that kind of a job. And you can enjoy it at every level. I mean, the guy who's playing in a coffee house with his acoustic guitar is still having a ball. It doesn't have to all be stadium tours and concerts and playing the Super Bowl and such. We all want to aspire to that because everybody would like to be independently wealthy. But if it's art that you're having fun with, you shouldn't bother you as long as you're enjoying it. Right? Do it for the enjoyment.
I was going to say, because I thought earlier part of this history story was really interesting because, of course, I got an engineering degree from Michigan, actually still in Ann Arbor.
I love Ann Arbor.
I actually work for the university at this point. What's interesting to me is that, the reason I like to, when I was in grad school, I was definitely writing to put myself through grad school, definitely. But what it is for me now is it's joy, right? I just like writing. And so, I think it's absolutely wonderful that I get to read stuff like what Matt writes and what Ed writes and others who are making a living of it. But I also think that everybody out there who likes to write, well, let me go with fantasy, Dad.
Eric, the fantasy is I walk out of the limo in my side-slit ankle-length gown and my diamond high heels, and I walk to the waiting executive jet, and the wet bar is open and feels on the table as I take off alone. That's the fantasy.
Yeah, that's basically what I meant. No.
And if you look over in the chat, you can see Curry actually was in a rock band. There's a picture
Yeah,
right
I
there
saw
for
that.
everybody.
Cool.
But my point is even if you aren't, as Matt said, the tiny percentage that make it through all those gauntlets, I think the more people that are doing writing and enjoying it, and I mean, for me, it's stress relief, right? I have a very different job than writing. And, I do better at my other job because I have the opportunity to be creative. And so, I love the fact that people are making a living being creative like that. And I've had some more opportunities probably than most to put my toe in that water. But I also think for the folks out there who really like our hobby, it's just important to keep writing, right? The more you create, the better you are as a storyteller, and the more you inspire other people.
No, absolutely. And Matt, you've dipped your toe in so many different styles of writing and different types, young adult, D&D. I love the whole Die Hard at Gen Con aspect. Is there one that you find that you are more familiar with when you write that just feels more like home?
It's funny. I end up writing all sorts of stuff. I'm not even fans of some of the stuff I write. Like the genre.
Oh, really?
Right? I end up writing horror novels sometimes, or horror stories, and I don't read horror. I just end up writing it sometimes. And fantasy, I don't read a lot of traditional fantasy stuff. I end up writing a lot of fantasy stuff.
Right.
Now I say I don't read it. I do read a lot now, and I've gone through periods though, especially when I was writing stuff starting out, where I wasn't reading a whole lot of fantasy, right? But I studied Tolkien when I was a kid, and I at university and whatever. And so I have a serious grounding in this stuff. But I'm not going to name names of famous authors that don't like to diss people, whatever. But there are, some of these long book cycles that I just can't stand, right? It's just not my kind of thing, right?
Right.
But I find myself, the stuff I like to write is stuff that's got a good, strong character who's kind of got the sarcastic banter and wit going about him. So, I often say that my stuff is it's been heavily influenced by, say, Raymond Chandler and J.R.R. Tolkien. Right? Mm-hmm. Those are probably my two biggest influences. And if you look at the Shotguns and Sorcery stuff, for instance, that's right at the crossroads of that. When I do the Halo novels with the ODST guys, where I have Nathan Fillion's voice running around my head, that's my ballpark too, right? Mm-hmm. I feel very comfortable doing that kind of stuff. This kind of half sarcastic hero that really may mock things occasionally, but then really comes through for everybody at the end. Mm-hmm. That's where I find things most exciting, whether it's no matter what genre I happen to be working with. But to me, genres are just tools for stories, right? The novel I'm working on right now, or I'm about to go back to, is a modern day thriller that has elements of MMORPGs and money laundering and military fiction as well. So it's a lot of different things mixed into each other. I call it No Country for Old Men meets World of Warcraft, right? It's
nice.
And I don't want to pin it down on anything in particular. It feels comfortable to me, so I'm going to write that story because I'm excited about that story. And the story matters more to me than any kind of genre.
Mm-hmm.
No, that makes sense. Now, another question I have for you, and I like asking different authors some of these questions too. Is there an author, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. Is there an author who had some success with a novel or a line of novels, or even one book that you had the hardest time reading? For me, it was China Mayville.
Okay.
Perdido Street Stations. I was told this is the most incredible book in the world. I was doing a writing class after work for a couple of years, and I go in there and work on some of my stories and read them out loud to see how people liked them. And one of the guys said, "Oh, you have to read Perdido Street Station." I bought that book, read I think 5 pages, and I've never gone back to it. I just can't read it. Is there anybody that
Well, again, I don't want to diss anybody, but I will.
No, I'm not. I don't want you to do it either.
For instance, Game of Thrones, right?
Right.
I like George's writing. I've read him in other stuff like Wild Cards and such, and I think he's an amazing writer. And obviously, a lot of people love his stuff.
Right.
And I don't mean to denigrate it all. However, I got about halfway through the first book, and I put it aside, and I just never picked it up again. And it wasn't.
Right.
really I can't stand it kind of thing because it was competently written, but it just didn't drag me along the way I wanted to be dragged along, right? And for me, a lot of the time, it's I have the kind of weakness with doorstop fantasies a lot of the time where I look at it and say, Jesus Christ, I better love this book because if it's going to be this long and I have to spend this much time, I better get something out of it, right? I'd rather burn through 3 or 4 other books and risk, enjoying or hating any one of them than spend the same amount of time going through a doorstop fantasy and going, oh God, why the hell did I do that to myself, right?
Robert Jordan.
Robert, you didn't like Terry Good? Is it Good Kind that his books are always 1,000 pages?
No, that was Robert Jordan.
Robert Jordan
was
too.
The one who was the Wheel of Time. Every book was at least 1,600 pages, and my friends, I had so many friends that told me like, "Oh, it's better than Tolkien. Have you read Tolkien? No, but it's better than Tolkien." So already, I hated it just because of that. But then I was like, you know what? I'm not reading any series that's like that doesn't have the final book in like process yet. I got burned by Blood Wars from TSR.
Oh, no.
First 2 books came out. TSR declared bankruptcy one of the numerous times that they did, and I had to wait like 2.5 or 3 years for the 3rd book to come out. So Robert Jordan was like, nope, not reading any of these until they're done. Same thing with Game of Thrones.
They finally finished that series. They got Brandon Sanderson coming and finally finished Wheel of Time. Right?
Yeah, because he died before he finished it, which was exactly what I was afraid of.
Yeah. But let's face it. If George kicked over tomorrow, somebody would step in and write it. I mean, there was just too much money involved.
No, absolutely.
Somebody would step in and write it. Unless he's got a stipulation in his will that says, right?
There's already like 24 rewrites of the last season that are like out there just as like slash fics. So.
Oh yeah, exactly. But I'm saying they would hire somebody. Whoever end up with the rights to that will hire somebody to write it. There's too much money lying around, right? For good and for bad. Hopefully, like Brandon, I've met Brandon a number of times, and he's a great writer. He actually does not write the same way that Robert Jordan does. They have a different style. Right. And in fact, Brandon had not read any of the novels when he was asked to pick up the torch and continue on with it. It was the editor who was married to Robert Jordan. The name escapes me.
Harriet.
There you go. She writes Brandon and says, "Are you interested in doing this?" And Brandon checks and says, "Oh, yeah, But he also is explaining to her, like, I don't know this stuff. She's like, I don't care. This is why I want you. She actually just put her trust in him and his talent and his style to be able to carry forward the story that her husband had started, which I thought was very brave of her as opposed to just trying to clone what he was doing. But to have somebody to just let him have some free reign there.
Right. So I want to caveat what I would asked you earlier is I don't really mean somebody's work that you just can't stand, but somebody's work who's popular that you have a hard time getting through, and that's what I was really kind of what I was saying.
Yeah,
and it's like it's the same thing with I agree with you with the Game of Thrones. I couldn't get through it either.
Obviously, a lot of people can, they love it, right?
Right, exactly.
And I'm not pissing in anybody's cornflakes or telling them they can't enjoy it, they enjoy it.
No,
if you
exactly.
love it. It's just Robin Laws is a great way of saying it. He says it's not my flavor.
Right.
It doesn't work for me. That's fine.
And that's perfect.
A lot of other things that will, and a lot of people will love it. So I'm sure George doesn't mind. It's okay.
No, exactly, because J.R.R. Rowling was kind of like that for me. I had a tough time getting through her books. I didn't like her style. Yep. Stories were beautiful, were wonderful. And the movies I thought were incredible. I just didn't like her style of writing. My style of writing
is a matter of taste.
It is a matter of taste, right? That's why I was curious because it's everybody has their likes and dislikes when it comes to writing. Because and you're such a prolific writer that you've written in so many genres. There had to be something that you would run across that.
Lots of stuff. But I read widely. I watch things widely. I explore. I read all sorts of different things. I read things outside of my genre. I read things that are incredible and award-winning. I read stuff that's absolute fucking trash, right? But part of it is trying to figure out, what works and what doesn't, what you can use as yourself. Once you become a professional doing this stuff, you're always tearing it apart, you're dissecting it. Like I remember reading The Bridges of Madison County, which is not my kind of a book at all, right?
Right.
And going, okay, this is now, at the time I was reading it, was the best-selling book in America. It was just on freaking fire. And I'm like, okay, let me read this and figure it out. I'm like, oh, I see why. I see what the audience is. I see why they respond to this. I'm not going to write that style, but I can see why this worked. And then I can see if there are parts of that I can try to adapt to what I'm doing here that work with my style. So I think every time you read something, you're learning something, and you can be learning good lessons or bad lessons or both. And then it's just really up to you as you sit down to your own work to figure out how to apply it.
Right. No, exactly.
And
But,
it's
yeah,
easier to learn from bad stuff.
Yeah, actually, it can be. You're right. It's hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes the good stuff you look at, you're like, how'd they do that? You know?
Yeah,
Yeah,
how
the
do they
bad
do
stuff,
that?
you're like, I know what's wrong here. Like, I know where that smell is coming from.
The bad stuff, it can still be fun, right? I mean, there's a lot of really great selling novels out there that are absolute trash as far as writing stuff, right? In my opinion. I mean, I don't like the writing stuff. And they sell like crazy. You're like, okay, why is this? And, what is this about this that resonates with people that I can figure out, right? It's actually the same kind of thing I do when I'm trying to translate a property from one media to another. I will sit down and immerse myself in that property, whatever, if it's a video game or a cartoon or whatever, and try to figure out what it is that people love it. And then if I can figure out how to love it as well, that I can transfer over those things that I enjoy about it that are transferable to the other media, right?
Right.
Well, that always gets down to evaluating your audience too, right? Because you're having to look like, well, if I'm moving this to this medium, like, who is my audience here, and what do they want? Like, as Ed got back to earlier, or mentioned earlier, you didn't always know who the audience you were supposedly writing for at TSR was.
Yeah.
And I imagine it's got to be like that with a lot of properties. Like,
we were talking about Sages and Specialists earlier. You guys liked the book. I wrote the book, and as soon as I was done with it, I never saw it. My author copies show up, and people tell me years later they liked it. I have no idea. Especially back in those days, there was no internet for people to like come up and rant at you through it. So,
Right.
So, and, the amount of feedback you got was, what were your sales numbers? And honestly, if you're doing work for hire for TSR in those days, they didn't give you sales numbers. You had no idea.
Nope.
You're just,
never
it's
knew.
shots in the dark, right?
Yeah.
Nowadays, I get my royalty statements, but you get royalty statements. You get them often every 6 months, and you have no idea what you did for marketing or whatever that works. It's all just kind of shots in the dark, right?
and who knows if there was like one thing that went viral in that 6 month period that accounted for like a third of the sales or something, which you definitely see that happen.
My best-selling book by far is the Marvel Encyclopedia, which I wrote 2 editions of, right? And one edition spent like 6 months on the New York Times, one of the New York Times bestseller lists. And it's crazy. I think like one Christmas, it was the number 5 best-selling book over Black Friday. It was insanely good selling. Unfortunately, I didn't get a royalty on it, so I'm going to be poor. But it's Marvel. It was a licensed book that somebody had done with a Marvel license, so of course Marvel gets the money. But and I have no idea. And I'm like, well, do I take any credit for that being a best-selling book? I'm like, well, it's Marvel. It does a lot. But then my buddy Ken Hite looks at me and says, there are an awful lot of other Marvel books out there that weren't best-selling books. So you should take that one. I'm like, okay, fine. I'll walk away. I mean, it certainly helped a lot. I'm not going to deny that. But there are even at that level, there's differences in what hits the list and what doesn't hit the list. And you just don't know until it goes out.
And I can tell you for a fact that every time a book hits Bridges of Madison County, the Da Vinci Code, other major publishers in the same market will sit down and have a dissection meeting where everybody reads the book or at least glances at it and says, okay, how can we write one of these? What is the essence? What's the popular thing? How can we get one of these on our list? They all do it. And they do it all the time. Oh, yeah.
And often fails because, you're already chasing a market that's established, right? That's once something comes in and becomes the bestseller, it has established that market for itself. And it's not like it suddenly disappears, right? People are hungry for that, might be hungry for something like it, but the best sellers are going to be things that establish their own space, that carve out their own. And it's hard to do that kind of stuff. But that's one of the, and also, publishing moves so slowly that you ought to be working on, if you write a book now, it probably won't be out for 2, maybe 3 years, depending on what you're doing, unless you're writing tie-in stuff to Minecraft, don't you? In which case it's out in 4 months or whatever. But, but most of the time it's a couple of years down the line, especially for creator-owned stuff. So you really can't be following a market in that sense. By the time your book comes out, the market will move along to a different taste. So you might as well write something that you're going to enjoy, that you believe in, that you feel really strongly about and resonates with you, and you hope it resonates with other people.
And the recent example of that is the zombie craze.
Yeah.
The novels hit, and then everybody who wants to write a Me Too novel, they've already missed the boat. Because the editors are buying them, and then there will come a time when all of a sudden, no more, that's old.
Right.
And
Or
the
they'll
last-
and say, here's a great zombie novel just like this. I'm like, well, yeah, but he's got another novel coming out. The guy everybody's emulating. You know what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's
Read
like
that instead.
I stopped looking at zombie games years ago.
Yeah.
I stopped looking at
Yeah.
Euro games that simulate being a medieval farmer about like a decade and a half ago because it's like, well, I'm sure there's great stuff that's coming out here, but you know what? I've already had my fill. There's already
Yep.
been a whole bunch of these.
And it'll cycle around again, but you never know. It
Yeah.
could be another 8-10 years, right? You want to get a funny coincidence, though. One of the guys who wrote one of the best-selling zombie novels was Max Brooks, who did World War Z, right?
Right.
He wrote
right.
the first official Minecraft novel, too.
Huh.
Really?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know why. There you go. I'm sure if Max Brooks calls you up at that point and says, I want to write a Minecraft novel. I'm already working on it. The publisher says, damn straight you are. And then they go off.
So other than Minecraft, what's in the future for Matt Forbeck?
Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Fairun and all the ships at sea. Dateline, Waterdeep. Flash! Today at the corner of Delzorn Street and Brondor's Way, Melvin the Myopic Magician squared off against Doodles the Deafened Druid in a spell battle of the Witless. Although no entries were reported as no actual spells were cast, they did bring in a dwarf share of gold and jewels as their spectacle was perceived as performance art by onlookers. Both were summarily arrested by the Watch for not having the proper permits to perform in the North Ward. This 10-day in the High Forest, the mythical descendants of the AVENGER held their annual beauty contest. To the surprise of no one in attendance, there was no clear winner as they were all absurdly beautiful, and sheer vanity alone had the judges voting for themselves. And finally, out of the libraries of Candlekeep, the wizened old scribes came to the unfortunate conclusion that for millennia we have simply been mispronouncing the word missile. It was recently discovered that an overly boisterous spellslinger with a lisp, thought to be the original creator of the magic missile spell, was blowing the whole thing out of proportion and had been overly braggadocious of its uses and powers. Would you like to know more? Then simply tune in to each and every episode of the Mages and Sages podcast and subscribe to the channel. Bash the like button and be sure to bear down on the bell button to keep up to date, for the bell tolls for thee.